In economic theory, a zero-sum game is a representation of a situation where each participant's loss or gain is exactly balanced by the losses and gains of the other participants. The total sum of all gains and losses is exactly zero. If one person wins, then the other one has to lose. When you come and play poker with me, you'll recognize it as a zero-sum game. You will have zero at the end of the night, and I will have the sum of all that you and I wagered. We can engage as human beings quite easily in zero-sum thinking. We do it in the context of romantic relationships, the idea that loving more than one person at a time means loving each one less. Which one, after all, is your favourite child? We do it when we talk about the jack of all trades being the master of none, the idea that having more skills must mean that we therefore have less aptitude. We do it in the context of social group competition, the belief that more resources for one group, say, for example, immigrants, means less for the others, say, for example, non-immigrants. Zero-sum thinking. We fall into it quite regularly in our lives. And it's what today's gospel is about. We have two stories sandwiched together. Around the outside, Jairus' daughter, and in the middle, the woman with the issue of blood. And they sit in interesting opposition to one another, and we're not intended to read them as if they are two separate stories living on their own. They are placed in this intermingling for the very purpose of our understanding them as a cohesive single narrative. Jairus' daughter was 12, and the woman who has the issue of blood has been at her disease for 12 years. You can imagine, if this were being presented as some Hollywood film, that you'd have shots cutting back and forth from, on the one hand, the joy of the family as they welcome this new child into the world, whooping and hollering and celebrations and smiles, and at the same moment, this woman noticing the first drops of blood. And as you see this montage of the little girl growing to become a toddler, so you see the woman with the issue of blood falling further and further out with her community, and her disease taking hold of her and ostracizing her from her people. The idea is that we understand them in relationship one to the other. These two events, the birth of the daughter, the beginning of the bleeding, are linked by their physicality. It's not that they are somehow causally related to one another, but for the purpose of these interwoven narratives, we're meant to understand them as cemented together from their very beginning. The woman who has had the disease for 12 years and the daughter who 12 years ago was born. And the characters relate to one another as well. Jairus speaks to Jesus of his daughter, and Jesus calls the woman daughter in his relationship with her. They are both from rich backgrounds. We hear the wonderful way that it's expressed, where this woman has spent, to her very last penny on physicians, and she has grown all the worse and no better. And I suspect that some of us have a certain sympathy with that position. Not that doctors are no good. I'd never dare to say such a thing. They're a great boon and wonderful for us, but that we have unreasonable expectations of what they're meant to be doing. We are sold the lie and the myth that through enough energy put into the care of our health, we can stave off death ever happening. And of course, the truth of the matter is that we stave off death a little longer and we live with a better quality of life a little longer, but there is nothing that is preventing our eternal or eventual destruction. They are linked, though, from their backgrounds, the woman having spent all the money that she has, and this child being the daughter of the leader of the synagogue, a significant man in the community. And they're living not far away from one another. Jesus is on his way to the daughter's house, to Jairus' house, when he is pressed upon by the crowds and when this woman sees her opportunity to meet with Jesus. Maybe they're even members of the same community. Maybe they know one another by name. But their lives are very different. The woman with the disease is now impoverished, relying presumably on the good nature of her fellow citizens to get by. She's pained, she has no way to contribute to the community's life, and she is unable to fulfill what at the time and within that culture and society is seen as her most valuable role, that of childbearing. Whilst Jairus' daughter is one of the most eligible young women in the community. Jairus' desire for Jesus' healing is public. He sends messengers in front of everybody to get to Jesus and to tell him, please come and heal my daughter. The woman's is private. She has to keep it secret. She is, of course, unclean. The Levitical scriptures rule that any woman with an issue of blood is unclean then for 7 days from the date of the bleeding. She has been unclean now for 12 years. Anybody who sits where she's sat, who touches her, becomes ritually unclean as well and set aside from the community. She's unable to take part in the everyday life, to be near other people, to be touched by other people. She is cut off through no fault of her own, nor of her community, who are simply seeking to live out as best they can the law set down to them by Moses. She is somebody who has been ostracized, and through her attempt to heal herself is now not only put aside from the community, but is impoverished with no way of caring for herself. The crowd was no place for this woman to be. If the people are so pressing in on Jesus that when he asks, "Who is it that touched me?" the disciples think he's mad, then so too the crowd must have been pressing in on this woman in her ritual uncleanness. And they probably would have been furious had they noticed that she was there in the midst of them, and that she, by her uncleanness, was too making them ritually impure. She could have got in serious trouble. Jairus desired Jesus to touch his daughter. That's what he says to her. Touch her and heal her. The woman desires to touch Jesus. Jairus' faith is one that is well informed. He knows of the power of Jesus in healing others, and the faith that he has in Jesus is what is going to heal his daughter. The woman is superstitious. She says, well, maybe if I can just touch the fringe of his cloak, then I'll be made whole. And Jesus sets her right about it. At the end of the story, he says, your faith has healed you. It's not the magical spell of touching a bit of my cloak, but it is your faith. And what happens when she touches is that Jairus' daughter's condition grows worse, and the woman is healed. If you go back to our Hollywood representation, you can imagine flicking back and forth between the two again, and the moment at which the woman touches Jesus' cloak and is healed, is made whole, in the same moment, Jairus' daughter breathes her final breath, and the mourning begins. These two lives, which have been connected from the very beginning 12 years ago, are connected here as well. The woman who stops Jesus on the way, prevents him from getting to the daughter, she is the one made well, while Jairus' daughter dies. And it's the wrong way round. The superstitious, unclean, impoverished woman who has endangered the ritual purity of the whole community by pushing her way into the middle of the crowd, she's the one who gets healed, and the saving of her life costs the life of the innocent child. But then, of course, the marvelously compelling twist is that Jesus ignores the fact that Jairus' daughter has died, and he raises her up to new life, and he heals her too. He breaks our zero-sum imagination that it has to be one or the other, that either he has to stop on the way and heal the woman, in which case he's too late to save the daughter, or he ignores the woman, leaving her in her disease, and pushes on to get to Jairus' daughter in time to save her. He breaks our imagination that it must be one or the other. Rather than our vision of scarcity that said that the healing power should be spent on the innocent child with her life ahead of her and not on the aging, unclean woman, Jesus' vision is one of abundance. There is enough for everyone and more besides. In the words of Hot Chocolate, everyone's a winner, baby. That's the truth. And that is what we're called to model as Christians. To remember that we don't need to safeguard our happiness and well-being at the cost of the other, but that our bountiful and generous God provides enough and more than enough. The healing of the woman is good for her, and it's good for her community. The healing of the girl is good for her, and it's good for her community. And the one does not need to be carried out at the cost of the other. So, when you find yourself falling into it, consign your zero-sum thinking to the rubbish bin and be abundant and generous thinkers instead. Amen.